Daniel froze in the nursery doorway, the world narrowing to the sight before him. His daughter's tiny hand resting against Amara's chest, her eyes closed in perfect peace. The woman looked up, startled, milk still warm on her breath. For one impossible second, he didn't see race or class or rules, only the truth he'd been running from. The Whitmore estate looked like something pulled from a glossy magazine: sprawling manicured lawns, white marble steps, and symmetrical gardens, so precise they seemed almost artificial. From the street it was perfect, but perfection, as anyone who's lived inside it knows, can be suffocating. Inside, the air was still. Daniel Whitmore moved through the foyer in a pressed charcoal suit, his steps echoing off the polished marble. He didn't move like a man walking through a home. He moved like a man walking through a museum, careful not to disturb the artifacts. Every corner held something his late wife had chosen: the Persian rug under the staircase, the gilt-edged mirror in the hallway, the arrangement of lilies in the vase that was replaced every Monday by the florist. Even after 3 years, Daniel couldn't bring himself to change anything. It was easier that way. In his study, the curtains were half closed, letting in just enough morning light to cast long stripes across the desk. Daniel picked up the framed photograph that never left the corner, his wife holding their newborn daughter Emily, her smile wide and effortless. She had a way of making joy look easy. He'd forgotten what that felt like. From the nursery upstairs came the faint, high-pitched chatter of Emily playing with her dolls. The sound tugged at him, but he glanced at his watch instead. A driver was waiting outside to take him to his meeting. He didn't have time for what? 5 minutes? A hug? A real conversation? He grabbed his briefcase. Across the city, Amara Johnson was standing in the cramped kitchen of her apartment, tightening the last button on her plain navy uniform. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic outside. On the counter sat a coffee mug with a chip along the rim, a loaf of bread, and a stack of unpaid bills she didn't have the energy to look at this morning. She tied her hair into a neat bun and stared at her reflection in the microwave door. There were faint shadows under her eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of days that kept stacking on top of each other. It wasn't that she disliked her work. She was grateful for it. But there was a difference between doing a job and belonging somewhere, and she knew better than to expect belonging. At 32, Amara had worked in more homes than she could count. Some were warm and chaotic, others cold and clinical. The Whitmore estate, from what she'd seen in her interview, leaned heavily toward the latter. Still, the pay was good, the hours steady, and she had a rule: never get too close, never overstep, and never bring her past into the room. She checked her phone. A single unread message from her sister. "You okay?" Amara didn't reply. She just slipped the phone into her bag and left for the bus stop. The first meeting between Daniel and Amara had been brisk. He had greeted her at the door, his handshake firm, his smile polite but distant. He explained her duties in clipped sentences: laundry on Tuesdays and Fridays, cleaning the downstairs bathrooms twice a week, keeping Emily's playroom tidy. "She has a routine," he'd said. "I'd like to keep it that way." Emily had peeked around the corner during the conversation, her curls bouncing as she shifted from one foot to the other. Her eyes were wide, cautious. She didn't run up to Amara the way some children did. She just watched. When Daniel excused himself to take a call, Amara knelt to Emily's height. "Hi there," she said softly. "I'm Amara." Emily's voice was small. "Do you like dolls?" "I used to," Amara said with a smile. "I had one named Lila when I was little. She had a pink dress, but I lost her at the park one day." Emily's mouth turned down. "That's sad." "It was," Amara admitted. "But I still remember her." "That's the nice thing about people and dolls. Even when you don't have them with you, you can keep them in here." She tapped her chest. Emily's brow furrowed in concentration before she whispered, "I'll show you my dolls tomorrow." It was the smallest moment, but something in Amara's chest shifted. By the end of her first week, Amara knew the rhythms of the house, the way Daniel left before breakfast most mornings, the way Emily played quietly unless she was outside, the way the television was rarely on. She also noticed the way Daniel's eyes softened whenever Emily laughed, though he was careful not to linger in those moments. One evening, as she was folding laundry in the living room, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. He paused in the doorway, watching her work. "Everything okay?" she asked, unsure if she'd overstepped. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I just appreciate the way you've kept things running smoothly. Emily seems calmer lately." Amara smiled faintly. "She's a good kid." "She is," Daniel said, almost to himself, before retreating to his study. It was nothing, and yet it was something. Neither of them knew it then, but the thin, careful threads of connection had already begun weaving themselves between them. In another week, one moment would pull those threads tight and change the shape of the house, the family, and the rules Daniel thought he lived by. Do you think it's possible for two people from such different worlds to genuinely connect without even realizing it? Tell me in the comments what you believe. I'll be watching for your answers. Rain had been threatening all morning, and by mid-afternoon the sky had turned the color of wet slate. Amara stood at the nursery window, watching fat drops hit the glass and run in thin rivulets toward the sill. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender from the fabric spray she'd used on Emily's bedding earlier. Emily was supposed to be napping, but instead, she'd woken with that slow, shuddering cry, the kind that didn't come from a nightmare or a scraped knee, but from some deeper ache Amara couldn't quite name. Amara crouched by her bed. "Hey, sweetheart. You okay?" Emily sniffled and shook her head. "It hurts." "Where, baby?" She pressed a tiny hand to her stomach, curling slightly. Amara's mind jumped to possibilities. Maybe she hadn't eaten enough at lunch, or maybe she'd eaten too much. She gently gathered Emily into her arms and felt the tension in her little body. Without thinking, Amara sat on the rocking chair in the corner and began to hum. It was the same lullaby she'd sung to Isaiah, her own son, before everything changed. Emily clung to her. Amara adjusted her hold so Emily's cheek rested against her chest. She rubbed her back in slow circles, feeling the tiny girl's breathing begin to even out. That's when it happened. Emily whispered, "Don't let go." Something inside Amara cracked. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get too close here, that this was just a job. But holding Emily, feeling that small heartbeat against her own, all those walls she'd built started to feel less like protection and more like a cage. Emily's small fingers clutched at her blouse. Amara realized the girl had quieted not just because of the rocking or the lullaby, but because of the warmth, the steady human comfort of being held. And Amara, without consciously deciding, let her lean closer. Let her feel safe. Downstairs, the front door clicked open. Daniel had left work early after an unexpectedly short board meeting. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home, not even the driver. He wanted to surprise Emily, maybe have an early dinner together. He walked up the staircase, the rain pattering gently against the tall windows in the foyer. A faint hum floated down the hall. It was a tune he didn't recognize, but it drew him in. He stepped quietly toward the nursery, pushing the door open just enough to see inside. The sight stopped him. Emily was curled in Amara's arms, her small hand resting against Amara's chest. Amara was humming softly, her eyes half closed, her fingers brushing through Emily's hair. It was intimate, maternal. Daniel's grip tightened on the doorknob. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way he'd expected to be. But there was a sharp pang in his chest, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else he couldn't name. For years, Emily had struggled to sleep without her nightlight, to calm herself without rocking in bed. And here she was, completely at peace in the arms of someone who'd only been in her life for a matter of weeks. He cleared his throat. "What's going on here?" Amara's eyes opened wide. She shifted slightly but didn't put Emily down. She wasn't feeling well. I was trying to calm her. Daniel's gaze flicked to Emily, who was watching him through sleepy lashes. "Daddy," she murmured, "don't be mad, please." "I'm not mad," he said, though his tone was tight. I didn't expect to see this." Amara swallowed, bracing for criticism. I'm sorry if it's inappropriate. No, Daniel cut in, his voice softening unexpectedly. She hasn't let anyone hold her like that since... His words trailed off. Since her mother, Amara finished quietly. The air between them thickened with unspoken things. Daniel stepped fully into the room, loosening his tie as he crossed to the rocking chair. He crouched beside them, his hand brushing Emily's hair. "You okay, Peanut?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes drooping again. "Amara makes it better." Daniel's jaw worked as if he was holding back something, a smile, a frown, a memory. He straightened, glancing at Amara. "Thank you." She gave a small nod, unsure if that was the end of the conversation or the beginning of something more. Later that evening, after Emily was tucked in, Daniel found Amara in the kitchen rinsing a plate. "I owe you an apology," he said, leaning against the counter. "For the way I walked in earlier, I wasn't upset, I just didn't expect to see her that comfortable with someone else." "It's all right," Amara replied, drying her hands. "I know it's not exactly in the job description." "Maybe it should be," Daniel murmured, almost to himself. Then, after a pause, "She needs that, more than I've been able to give her lately." Something about the way he said it, not defensive but almost regretful, made Amara see him differently. He wasn't the cold, detached employer she'd pegged him as. He was a father who had lost something irreplaceable and didn't quite know how to bridge the gap. That night, as Daniel sat in his study pretending to read, his mind kept replaying the image of Emily asleep in Amara's arms. It stirred something in him, not just gratitude but the unsettling realization that maybe he'd been wrong about what Emily needed. It also stirred something else, something more dangerous. When someone breaks an unspoken rule but does it out of genuine care, should you let it slide or set boundaries immediately? Share your thoughts below. By the time the rain stopped and the house fell silent, both Daniel and Amara knew that whatever line had existed between them had shifted. Neither of them could quite put it back where it belonged. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled across the manicured lawn, throwing gold onto the Whitmore estate's polished floors. But the air inside felt heavier than the day before. Daniel lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, nursing a coffee he barely touched. Amara moved around him with careful efficiency, preparing Emily's breakfast without meeting his eyes. Every time she reached past him for a plate or leaned over the counter to slice fruit, Daniel felt that image from yesterday flash behind his eyes, Emily in her arms, her cheek against her chest. He cleared his throat. "Did Emily sleep all right?" "She did," Amara replied, keeping her tone neutral. "She asked for the lullaby before bed." He almost smiled, but caught himself. "Good." The conversation died there, swallowed by the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Later that morning, Emily sat cross-legged in the playroom, coloring a picture of what looked like a house with a rainbow overhead. Amara crouched beside her, offering crayons and encouragement. Daniel appeared in the doorway, holding his phone loosely. He'd come to check on Emily before heading to his office. "She's getting pretty good," he said, nodding toward the drawing. Emily beamed. "It's our house, and that's Amara." Daniel blinked. "You put Amara in the picture?" "Of course," Emily said matter-of-factly. "She's here every day. She's part of the house." Something in Daniel's chest shifted. He covered it with a small nod. "That's nice." Amara didn't look up, but her hand stilled on the crayon box. She knew what Emily's words meant, and she knew she couldn't let herself become too much a part of this world. That afternoon, Amara avoided the nursery. She kept to the laundry room, the kitchen, the formal sitting area that was rarely used. It wasn't that she didn't want to see Emily. She adored her. But yesterday had crossed a line. She told herself it wasn't professional to hold the girl like that. It wasn't safe either, for her heart or for her job. She'd worked in enough homes to know that emotional entanglement never ended well. So when Emily called for her from the top of the stairs, Amara forced herself to answer with a cheerful but distant, "Coming," Daniel noticed. By mid-evening, it was obvious to him that Amara was keeping a deliberate space between them. She spoke less, avoided eye contact, and left rooms the moment he entered them. Emily chatted happily between bites of macaroni. oblivious to the quiet war playing out above her head. When Emily was in bed, Daniel found Amara wiping down the counters. "You've been different today," he said, his voice careful. She didn't stop wiping. "Just busy." "That's not it." Finally, she met his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore." "Daniel," he corrected gently. "Daniel," she began again. "I don't want yesterday to cause any misunderstandings. I know my place here, and I want to keep things clear." His brow furrowed. "Is that what you think? That I misunderstood?" "I think it's easy to blur lines in situations like this. I care about Emily. I just don't want that to be seen as overstepping." Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand over his jaw. "You're right about one thing. You do care about her. That's rare. I don't want you to pull back because of some unspoken rule that doesn't need to be there." "That's easy for you to say," Amara murmured, "but in my experience, rules change fast when feelings get complicated." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Then Amara broke it, turning back to her work. The next day brought more distance. Daniel left early for meetings. Amara kept Emily occupied with crafts and stories, never letting their play drift toward the kind of closeness that had sparked everything. But Emily noticed. Children always do. At nap time she looked up from her pillow and whispered, "Why don't you hold me anymore?" Amara froze. You're getting to be a big girl, Emily. Big girls can fall asleep on their own." Emily frowned, clearly unconvinced. "I like it better when you're close." The words sank into Amara like stones. She brushed the girl's hair back and kissed her forehead. "Close doesn't always mean safe, sweet one," she whispered to herself after she'd left the room. That night, Daniel couldn't focus on his reports. The quiet of the house made him restless. He found himself standing outside the laundry room where Amara was folding towels. "I don't know what happened to make you think you have to retreat," he said, his voice low, "but I don't want my daughter losing something that makes her feel safe." Amara's hand stilled on the towel. "It's not just about her. It's about boundaries. About making sure we all stay where we're supposed to." Daniel stepped closer. "And where's that, exactly?" She met his gaze, her eyes steady but guarded. "You're her father. I'm the help. That's the line. Do you believe emotional bonds should have limits in professional roles, or should care always override protocol? Drop your answer in the comments." Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew that the line had already been crossed. And once crossed, lines have a way of fading until you can't tell where they ever were. The following Saturday began with unexpected chaos. Daniel had been planning to take Emily to the zoo. He'd even promised her they'd ride the carousel twice, but by mid-morning, the driver called in sick and the only available replacement wouldn't arrive for hours. "Daddy, can't we still go?" Emily pleaded, clutching her little backpack shaped like a penguin. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "We'll figure something out, Peanut." He glanced toward Amara, who was standing near the kitchen island, trying very hard not to get pulled into this conversation. "You drive, don't you?" Daniel asked her. Amara hesitated. "Yes, but—" "Perfect. We'll take my SUV. I'll sit in the back with Emily. You can drive. That way I can keep her entertained." Amara almost said no, not because she couldn't do it, but because the thought of being trapped in a car with Daniel for over an hour made her pulse quicken for all the wrong reasons. But Emily's hopeful eyes won. "All right," she said quietly. The drive started in silence. Rain the day before had left the world smelling fresh, and the sun was warm on the windshield. Emily sang softly to herself in the back seat while Daniel sat beside her, occasionally leaning forward to point out horses or old barns along the road. Amara kept her eyes on the highway, hands steady on the wheel. She could feel Daniel's gaze occasionally flick to the rearview mirror, catching her profile. Halfway there, the SUV lurched. A warning light blinked on the dash. Amara's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's the low tire pressure light." Daniel frowned. "There's a gas station a mile ahead. Pull in." 10 minutes later, they were parked beside an air pump that refused to work. The attendant explained it would be at least 30 minutes before someone could help. Emily sat on the curb with her penguin backpack, while Daniel paced and Amara leaned against the SUV, arms folded. "We could call a cab," she offered. Daniel shook his head. "Emily's car seat is in here. We're not moving it into some stranger's vehicle." "So, we wait?" "We wait," he said, exhaling. With no one else around, the three of them ended up sitting together on the curb under the shade of a tree. Emily entertained herself by making up stories about passing cars. Amara found herself laughing, genuinely, when Emily described a beat-up red sedan as a dragon in disguise looking for pizza. Daniel watched her laugh, the sound soft but real. "You should do that more," he said quietly. "What?" "Laugh like that. It's different from when you're just being polite." Amara looked away, suddenly aware of how close their knees were on the curb. "Careful, Daniel. You're blurring lines again." "Maybe some lines need blurring." The attendant eventually fixed the tire, and they made it to the zoo with just enough time for one carousel ride, instead of two. Emily didn't mind. She made Daniel and Amara ride together, with her wedged between them in the same row. Daniel noticed how naturally Amara steadied Emily when the ride started, one hand at her back, the other holding the safety pole. It was the same kind of protectiveness he used to see in his late wife, and it stirred something deep in him. On the drive home, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against Amara's sweater that she'd handed back to her. Daniel watched from the corner of his eye as Amara glanced in the mirror at the sleeping child, her expression softening in a way she probably didn't know he could see. "You care more than you admit," Daniel said quietly. Amara kept her eyes on the road. "Caring is easy. Staying where you belong is the hard part." "Who says where you belong?" "I do," she replied, her tone final, but her grip on the wheel betrayed the slight tremor in her resolve. That evening, after Emily was in bed, Daniel passed the open laundry room door and saw Amara folding the sweater Emily had used as a pillow. "You know," he said, leaning on the doorframe, "most people in your position wouldn't go to half the lengths you do. I'm not blind to that." Amara didn't look up. "I'm not here to be most people, that's obvious." Their eyes met briefly. It was enough to acknowledge that despite both their efforts, something was shifting, not in grand gestures, but in these small, unguarded moments. "Do you believe fate sometimes engineers situations to force people together? Or is it all just coincidence? Let me know in the comments." The day had started as a simple trip to the zoo, but it had ended with the three of them closer, physically and emotionally, than they had been in weeks. And both Daniel and Amara knew that kind of closeness couldn't be easily undone. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the air was crisp enough to hint at autumn. Emily had gone to bed early after an afternoon of finger painting, leaving Daniel and Amara alone in the quiet house. Daniel had retreated to his office, but a spilled cup of paint water on one of Emily's storybooks had sent Amara looking for a replacement copy. She found herself in the library, a room she'd never really explored. Mahogany shelves stretched floor to ceiling, and the faint smell of leather and paper hung in the air. As she scanned the titles, her eyes landed on a faded photo frame tucked between two books. The picture was of Daniel, younger, holding a woman with auburn hair and laughing eyes. They both had paint smudges on their clothes, as if they'd just been caught in some playful disaster. Amara set the frame down gently, but the sound of the door creaking behind her made her freeze. Daniel stepped inside. "You found her," he said quietly. "I'm sorry," Amara began. "I didn't mean to—" "It's fine," he interrupted, moving past her to pick up the frame. His thumb brushed over the woman's face. Her name was Claire. They sat in two leather chairs facing the fireplace, the photo resting on the table between them. "We met in college," Daniel said. "She was an art major. I was, well, the son of a man who thought business was the only thing worth studying. Claire taught me how to see the world in color instead of numbers." His voice softened. "We were married for 8 years. Then Emily was born." Amara listened, hands clasped in her lap. "One morning," Daniel continued, "Claire was driving to an art exhibit she'd helped organize. A truck ran a red light. She died instantly. Emily was barely 2. The silence that followed was thick. Amara could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock down the hall. She never even got to see Emily's first painting, Daniel murmured. Amara swallowed hard. I'm sorry. That kind of loss, it changes everything. Daniel's eyes flicked to hers. It does. I threw myself into work, hired the best nannies money could buy, but none of them stayed more than a year. They were efficient, but Emily never connected with them. Until you. Amara looked down. Maybe because I know what it's like to lose someone. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Who? She hesitated, her voice low. My mother. She died when I was 15. She was a nurse, worked double shifts, sometimes triple, to keep food on the table. One night, she fell asleep at the wheel coming home. I was the one who found her car on the side of the road. Daniel's breath caught, but he stayed quiet, letting her speak. My father. He wasn't really in the picture. After that, I bounced between relatives who treated me like a guest more than family. I learned quickly not to get too attached. It hurt less that way. Daniel's gaze softened. That's why you pull back when things get too close. Amara gave a small, rueful smile. And that's why you hold on too tightly when you find someone who matters. The truth hung between them, heavy and intimate. They didn't speak for a long while. Daniel poured them both tea from a set Claire had bought years ago. The cups clinked softly against the saucers, and for the first time, Amara didn't feel like just an employee in that room. She felt like someone trusted. But trust was dangerous. Trust made lines disappear. She rose, placing her empty cup back on the table. Thank you for telling me about her. And for listening to me. Thank you for staying, Daniel replied quietly. The rest of the week carried a different weight. Daniel found himself watching Amara more closely, noticing the way she smoothed Emily's hair absent-mindedly or hummed while cooking. Amara, in turn, felt a strange warmth whenever Daniel was near, but she still kept an invisible hand on the brakes. She knew better than to mistake shared pain for permission to fall. On Friday evening, Emily came running into the kitchen with a crumpled piece of paper. Look, I drew all of us, she exclaimed. Amara unfolded it. There was Emily in the center, Daniel on one side, and Amara on the other, all holding hands under a bright sun. Daniel looked over her shoulder at the drawing. His hand brushed hers just for a second as they both bent down to praise Emily's art. Neither of them pulled away immediately. When two people share deep wounds, does it bring them closer, or risk them clinging to each other for the wrong reasons? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. By the end of the night, both Daniel and Amara knew they understood each other in a way no one else in their lives currently did, but they also knew that understanding was the first step toward a kind of closeness neither of them had planned for. The first sign that things were changing came on a Sunday morning. Daniel had planned to work from home, but when he walked into the living room, he found Emily and Amara sprawled across the floor, surrounded by colored paper, glue sticks, and glitter. Emily's hair sparkled as if she'd just been crowned by a fairy godmother. You're supposed to use glitter on the paper, not yourself, Daniel teased. Emily grinned. It's fairy dust. Amara says it makes wishes come true. Amara, sitting cross-legged, glanced up with a half-smile. Only if you believe in them. Daniel surprised himself by sitting down on the floor beside them. All right then, what are we wishing for? Emily held up her glitter-covered hands and closed her eyes dramatically. I wish for more pancakes, with chocolate chips. Amara laughed, a real laugh, the kind that made her eyes crinkle. Daniel found himself watching her more than the craft project. Later that afternoon, when Emily went to her friend's birthday party, Daniel found Amara in the kitchen, humming as she rinsed paintbrushes in the sink. Is that a song you know? He asked, leaning against the counter. My mother used to sing it while cooking, she said. It's from an old lullaby. Can you sing the rest? She hesitated, then began softly, a low melodic hum that wrapped around the quiet kitchen like warm sunlight. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, letting the sound sink in. When she finished, she busied herself drying the brushes. "Emily must like it," he said. "She falls asleep faster when I hum it." Daniel smiled faintly. "I guess that's your superpower." The following week brought rain, heavy, endless rain that made the house feel smaller. On Wednesday evening, a power outage plunged the rooms into darkness. Emily squealed with excitement as Daniel fetched candles. Amara pulled blankets onto the couch, and soon the three of them sat together in a makeshift fort of flickering light. They played card games by candlelight, and when Emily grew sleepy, Amara tucked her under one of the blankets. "You should get some rest too," Daniel told her once Emily drifted off. "And leave you to guard the fort alone," Amara replied lightly. "I think I'd rather have you here," he said, his voice softer than he meant it to be. For a while, they simply sat in the quiet, listening to the rain. The conversation turned to books, favorite stories from childhood, the ones they'd read until the pages wore thin. Amara spoke of a novel her mother used to read to her, about a girl who found a hidden garden. "I always wanted to find my own secret place," she said. "Maybe you already have," Daniel said, his gaze steady on her. She met his eyes, and for once didn't look away immediately. The days that followed felt subtly different. They began sharing morning coffee, sometimes in silence, sometimes trading light conversation. Daniel noticed how Amara's presence steadied the house, and how, when she smiled, it reached her eyes more often now. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, their hands brushed while passing a plate. Neither pulled away right away. Friday night brought another unexpected moment. Emily insisted they all watch a movie together. She sat between them at first, but halfway through she climbed into Amara's lap, leaving Daniel and Amara sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. Daniel didn't move, neither did she. By the time the credits rolled, the rain had stopped outside, leaving the windows fogged from the warmth inside. Emily was fast asleep, and Daniel carried her upstairs. When he came back, Amara was still on the couch, the blanket pooled around her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For making this house feel alive again." Amara's throat tightened. "Daniel." He stepped closer, but she shook her head slightly. "Don't ruin it by saying too much." So he didn't. Instead, he just sat beside her again, the silence saying enough. When two people stop guarding themselves, is it always a step toward love? Or can it be dangerous? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. By the end of that week, Daniel and Amara were no longer just a man and his employee, or even just two people who'd shared painful pasts. They were becoming something else. And whether they admitted it or not, they were both starting to want more. The weekend began with warmth. Saturday morning, the Whitmore kitchen smelled of cinnamon and brown sugar. Amara had let Emily help mix pancake batter, which mostly meant flour on the counter and giggles echoing off the marble walls. Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching with a faint smile as Amara gently guided Emily's hands. "She's getting better at this," he said. "She says she wants to open a pancake restaurant when she grows up," Amara replied, smiling without looking up. "And I told her she'll need a good dishwasher." Daniel chuckled. "You volunteering?" "I was going to nominate you." That made Emily laugh, and the sound tugged something deep in Daniel's chest, a sound he hadn't heard in this house since Claire. It felt like family. But that peace would not last. Late that afternoon, unannounced, Margaret Whitmore arrived. She never knocked. The housekeeper used to joke that Margaret believed walls were lucky to have her inside them. Daniel was in the garden with Emily, watching her chase butterflies. Amara had gone inside to make lemonade when the door opened, and Margaret's heels tapped across the foyer like a warning bell. Amara turned, startled. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said politely. Margaret's gaze swept over her. "Where's Daniel?" "In the garden. I'll let him know you're here." "Don't bother." She walked past Amara without a second glance and headed toward the back patio. Amara's stomach turned. From the kitchen window, Amara could see Margaret stiffen as she stepped outside, watching Emily laugh with Daniel while clutching a flower crown Amara had woven for her earlier. Margaret's lips pressed into a line. Daniel stood to greet her. Emily squealed and ran over. "Grandma!" Margaret smiled thinly. "Darling girl, I see your maid is still playing house." Daniel's smile vanished. "Mother, I just find it curious, that's all," Margaret continued. "She's certainly embedded herself in your lives, almost like she belongs here." "She does belong here," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "Daniel, I know grief makes people reach for comfort in strange places, but there are appearances to consider. A man of your status inviting this kind of attention." Emily glanced between them, confused. "Daddy?" Daniel looked down, hesitated, then said nothing. Amara saw it all through the window. By the time Daniel returned inside, Amara had already packed a bag. She was folding a sweater into a small suitcase when he appeared in the doorway. "You're leaving?" he asked, disbelieving. She didn't look up. "She's right. I stayed too long." "No." She was out of line. "You didn't defend me, Daniel," she said quietly, finally meeting his eyes. "Not really. I didn't know what to say." "Exactly." Her voice didn't rise, but it trembled. "Because when it mattered, you didn't want to say anything. Not to her. Not in front of your daughter, not to the world, because deep down I'm still just the help, and you're afraid of what it looks like." Daniel stepped forward. "That's not true." "Then why did you let her humiliate me in my own place of work, in front of the child I love like she's my own?" He didn't have an answer, not one that mattered. Emily appeared in the hallway. "Amara." Her voice was small. "Why are you taking your bag?" Amara crouched down, hugging her tightly. "I just have to go away for a little bit, baby. Just for a while." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Did I do something wrong?" Amara kissed her forehead. "Never." She stood, brushed past Daniel, and walked out the front door. That night the Whitmore estate felt colder than it had in years. Daniel sat in the nursery long after Emily had fallen asleep, the rocking chair creaking beneath him. He stared at the stars through the window, but all he could think of was the look on Amara's face as she left. Not angry, not bitter, just heartbroken. He had failed, not as a man or a boss or a father, but as someone who had been given the rare chance to love again, and flinched. The next morning Margaret called. "I did you a favor," she said. "You'll thank me later." Daniel didn't respond at first. Then quietly, "If what happened yesterday is your idea of protecting me, I don't need your protection anymore." "Daniel," he hung up. "When silence speaks louder than words, is it a betrayal? Have you ever stayed quiet when someone needed you to speak? Let's talk in the comments. I want your honesty." For the next 2 days, Daniel went through the motions. He read to Emily at night. He showed up at meetings. He answered calls. But the house felt hollow. The rooms echoed. And Emily, who once ran with glitter and storybooks, now asked every morning, "When is Amara coming back?" Daniel didn't have an answer, but he was about to make a choice. Monday morning dawned grey and windless. Daniel stood in the kitchen staring at a pot of water boiling for no one. Emily sat at the island, colouring half-heartedly. Her pancakes, once her favourite, remained untouched on the plate. "She left 'cause Grandma was mean, right?" she said suddenly. Daniel looked up, caught off guard. "What makes you say that?" Emily shrugged, her little hands pressing too hard on a green crayon. "She always talks like Amara's not good enough. But she is. She was always good enough." The words hit him harder than he was ready for. Out of the mouths of babes. "You're right," he said quietly. "She was." Daniel cancelled his meetings that day. He tried to work, but couldn't stop thinking about Amara. Not just the way she left, but the way she stayed for so long when it wasn't easy. He remembered the first time she made Emily laugh so hard she snorted. He remembered her humming in the kitchen. He remembered how, when Emily got sick, she didn't sleep. She just held her all night, whispering things Daniel couldn't hear but somehow felt. And he remembered what it felt like to sit beside her in candlelight, wishing time would slow down. He grabbed his keys. Across the city, Amara was folding towels in the cramped laundry room of her cousin's apartment. "You sure you don't want to take more time off?" her cousin Kendra asked gently. Amara shook her head. "I have to stay busy. I can't sit around thinking about that house." Kendra leaned against the doorway. You cared about him, didn't you? Amara hesitated. I cared about them. All I know, Kendra said, is people don't walk away from something real unless they think they'll get hurt staying. Amara didn't reply. She couldn't. Daniel drove across town, rehearsing what he'd say. How do you explain to someone that you do love them, but you let fear speak louder? How do you admit that you let them walk away because you were still carrying the weight of someone long gone? When he reached the building, he sat in the car for a full 5 minutes before finally stepping out. The hallway smelled of old paint and laundry detergent. He found her door and raised his hand to knock. Before he could, it opened. Amara froze. Rain had begun to fall behind him, misting his shoulders. He looked every bit as out of place as a man in a 3-piece suit could on a worn apartment threshold. Hi, he said. Amara crossed her arms. You shouldn't be here. I know. He paused. But I needed to be. She stared at him, waiting. I let you walk out of my life because I didn't have the courage to stop you. Not in front of my mother, not in front of my daughter, not even in front of myself. She exhaled through her nose. Do you know how hard it was to leave that house, that child? I do now. Amara leaned against the doorframe. What do you want, Daniel? He stepped closer. I want to tell you that you were never just an employee, that you were never invisible, that every day you were in that house it was a little more alive, and because of you. Rain tapped against the windows down the hall. I miss you, he said simply. Emily misses you. But I'm not just here for her. Amara's throat tightened. It's not that simple. Maybe not, but it could be, if you let it. They stood in silence, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Then Amara stepped aside, just enough for him to enter. They didn't fall into each other's arms. They didn't kiss. They sat on the small couch, both facing forward. I don't know how to do this, Daniel admitted. I don't know how to be with someone who sees all of me. Amara looked at him. Then we'll learn together. Have you ever walked away from something real, only to wish you had the courage to turn back? Let me know. I read every comment. Later that night, Daniel walked back into the Whitmore house with Amara beside him. Emily, already in pajamas, raced down the stairs the moment she saw them. Amara, she cried, launching into her arms. You're back, you're back. Daniel watched as Amara held her, tears in her eyes. This wasn't about status or race or class. It was about love. Real, messy, inconvenient, healing love. And for the first time in years, Daniel wasn't afraid of it. The Whitmore house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not hollow, not cold, just peaceful. Morning light spilled across the living room as Daniel walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. Amara sat on the couch, curled up in one corner, flipping through a children's book. She looked up, smiled, and took the mug. Their fingers brushed. No one looked away this time. Upstairs, Emily was playing dress-up in the nursery, a tutu over her pajamas, a plastic tiara sliding off her head. Do I look like a princess? She asked, striking a dramatic pose. You look like the princess, Amara said, appearing in the doorway. Now come brush your teeth before your royal subjects revolt. Emily giggled and scampered off, tiara wobbling. Daniel leaned in the doorway behind her. You're good with her. I love her, Amara said simply. He stepped closer. She loves you too. He paused. We both do. Amara's breath caught, but this time she didn't push the moment away. She just reached for his hand. That evening, the 3 of them cooked dinner together. Daniel wore an apron Amara had bought for Emily that said, "Kiss the cook," in glitter letters. It barely fit him, which made Emily laugh until she snorted. They made tacos. Daniel burnt the first batch of tortillas. Emily dropped half the cheese on the floor. Amara nearly sliced her thumb while laughing at a joke Daniel tried to make. It was a disaster. It was perfect. After dinner, they watched a movie on the couch, all 3 of them huddled under one big blanket. Emily fell asleep halfway through, her head in Amara's lap, her tiny hand gripping the edge of Daniel's sweater. They didn't move for a long time. Later, after tucking Emily in, Amara stood in the nursery for a moment, just watching her sleep. Daniel joined her silently. They stood side by side, the soft hum of the nightlight filling the silence. "Funny," he whispered. "This is where it all started." Amara glanced at him. "You mean the day you thought I crossed a line?" "I mean the day I realized you were already part of this family, and I was just too blind to admit it." She smiled a little. "You were terrified." "I still am." "Of what?" "That I'll lose this again." Amara reached down, adjusting Emily's blanket. "Then don't." Daniel's voice broke a little. "Stay." "I already did." "Do you believe some people are meant to walk into your life not when it's convenient, but when it's needed most? Leave me your thoughts in the comments, and this is the moment we all feel together. The next morning, Daniel came downstairs to the smell of pancakes. Not the kind you order from a hotel chef, but the kind made with too much batter, with imperfect circles and syrup that runs off the plate. Emily sat at the kitchen island, humming to herself as Amara flipped a pancake in the pan. Daniel came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and kissed the top of her head. Amara turned, eyebrows raised. "Since when are you a morning person?" "Since I woke up next to you," Emily groaned. "Ew." They all burst into laughter. That evening, after bedtime, Daniel stood at the doorway of the nursery again, just like he had that first day. Only this time, the room wasn't a place of uncertainty. It was home. Inside, Amara sat in the rocking chair, humming the same lullaby Daniel had heard so many weeks ago. Emily lay curled in her lap, breathing slow and even, her little hand resting on Amara's heart. Daniel didn't freeze this time. He stepped in, knelt beside them, and pressed a soft kiss to Emily's forehead. He looked at Amara. "Home," he whispered. She reached for his hand. "It always was. We just had to see it. If you believe love, the unexpected, inconvenient, undeniable kind, is worth fighting for, leave a chat in the comments. And if you've ever been the Amara in someone's story, tell us. Your voice matters here.